2 days ago, I recorded this episode to be released today, focusing on Shohei Ohtani and his Saturn Return. While this episode will still center on Shohei, in the time since recording, we received some sad news of the passing of an iconic figure, Los Angeles legend and Dodger great, Fernando Valenzuela. Before we delve into Shohei and the Saturn Return, I'd like to say a few words to honor Fernando, who quite simply was my introduction to baseball. In 1981, growing up just a few hundred miles north of Los Angeles, my small circle, including my 9-year-old cousin Jack, caught Fernando fever. His enthusiasm for Fernando and the Dodgers sparked my own, and before long, I was all in. Born under the sun in Scorpio, the sign of transformation and magic, Fernando Valenzuela captured fans in the spring of 1981 when Fernandomania took over. This 20-year-old pitcher from the small town of Ichocaila, Mexico, cast a spell on Dodger fans, transforming not just Los Angeles, but the nation. Like Shohei Ohtani, whom we'll discuss later in this episode, Fernando set a standard in baseball that has never been matched. He remains the only player to have won the Cy Young and the Rookie of the Year award in the same season, a feat unmatched to this day. Fernando was born with Pisces, the sign of dreams, rising along the horizon at the moment of birth, and on April 9, 1981, the dream season for Fernando and the Dodgers began when all-star left-hander Jerry Royce was unexpectedly scratched due to a calf injury. Dodger manager Tommy Lasorda turned to the rookie Fernando Valenzuela. At game time, the Sun, the planet of vitality, and Venus, Lady Luck, were both at 20 degrees in Aries, passing through Fernando's first house of courage and personality, aligning perfectly with the 20-degree Aries placement of his natal moon, which is exactly where the moon was on November 1st, 1960, when Fernando was born. Mars, the planet of courage and the planetary ruler of Aries, was just 2 degrees away at 18 degrees conjunct Fernando's moon. And that day, Fernando pitched 9 shutout innings, leading the Dodgers to a 2-0 victory over the Houston Astros. And over the next 6 games, he just allowed 1 run. And each game was a complete game. That season, Neptune, the planet of dreams and the planetary ruler of Fernando's ascendant, Pisces, and Pluto, the planet of transformation, the planetary ruler of Fernando's sun, Scorpio, were positively aligned with Fernando's midheaven, representing a reimagined sense of achievement and destiny. Fernando Valenzuela's rookie season was the greatest start to a baseball career ever seen. He passed away on October 22nd, nearly 43 years to the day since he pitched the Dodgers to a victory in Game 3 over the Yankees in the 1981 World Series, which the Dodgers won in 6 games. It was the last time these two iconic teams faced off in the World Series, and remarkably, they are playing each other again this year, and Game 6 falls on November 1st, Fernando's birthday. Just the thought of the Dodgers winning on that day gives me chills. To those who are making decisions regarding the Hall of Fame, remember, it's called the Hall of Fame. And from my perspective, and what I felt as a 5-year-old boy in 1981, there has never been a player in the history of baseball more famous than Fernando Valenzuela was that season. Fernandomania transformed baseball, the Dodgers, and Los Angeles in that magical season. My deepest condolences to the Valenzuela family, his friends, and the fans who loved him so dearly. Rest in peace, Fernando.
Welcome to the Weekly Transit, a podcast exploring the intersection of Western astrology and Jungian psychology. Astrology is a language that communicates how the planets and stars influence life on Earth, while psychology helps us navigate both conscious and unconscious experiences. Together, these tools offer the potential for self-understanding, growth, and transformation. Join astrologer Scott Tajarian and me, psychotherapist Gabriella Durso, as we dive into the cosmic forecast each week.
Welcome to the Weekly Transit, and thank you for joining us. If you enjoy our content and want to support the podcast, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, liking our videos, and leaving a comment or question. You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and if you'd like to donate, you can do so through Spotify for US listeners or Donor Box for those that are international. The links to do so are in the show notes. Gabriella and I truly appreciate your engagement. It helps us tailor our content to your interests and grow our community by reaching new listeners. In this midweek edition of the Weekly Transit, I'm going to be discussing Shohei Ohtani. Now, if you're not interested in sports, perhaps there's someone in your life who is interested in sports, but not interested in astrology. And perhaps this is a topic that can bridge the gap between astrology and sports, between you and whoever it is in your life that doesn't have an interest in astrology, but does have an interest in sports. Shohei Ohtani is one of those individuals who transcends sports, meaning that even if you're not interested in sports, you've probably heard of Shohei Ohtani. He's an anomaly, a unicorn, someone who we have never seen the likes of and probably will never see the likes of him again, because in his sport, the sport of baseball, which has been around for almost 180 years, he is accomplishing feats that have not only never been done, but until they were done by Ohtani, nobody even imagined that they could have been done. Now, Shohei Ohtani and the Los Angeles Dodgers just punched their ticket to the World Series, where they will play the New York Yankees. This sets up to be an epic battle. And these two teams have met more times in the World Series than any other team, but they haven't met in the World Series since in 43 years. It was 1981, which was actually the first time I ever even remember there being a World Series or being conscious of a World Series was 1981. I was 5 years old, almost 6. And that's when I first became aware of sports, baseball. It became like a conscious sort of thing in my life. And so in this episode, I'm not going to talk about predictions. I don't get into predictions, especially in terms of sports. If I knew how to predict sports, I would be an avid gambler, but that is not where my gifts lie, in gambling and betting on sports. So I'm not going to be talking about who I think is going to win. What I hope is that this series lasts 7 games, and in the top of the 9th inning, I hope Aaron Judge of the New York Yankees comes up. It's a tie game. I hope he hits a home run to break the tie. And then I hope in the bottom of the 9th inning, Shohei Ohtani comes up to bat and he hits a walk-off home run. That would be epic. That would be so exciting to see. It's very exciting because there are players on both teams that are generational players like Aaron Judge, Juan Soto, Giancarlo Stanton on the Yankees. And then on the Dodgers, you have Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Shohei Ohtani. It's just an incredible cast of characters on both sides. And I'm very excited to see how it all plays out. But what's so interesting to me is Shohei Ohtani, because he's in the midst of his Saturn return. And in his Saturn return, which, I mean, if you've heard of the Saturn return, how many times have you heard someone say, "Oh, your Saturn return," like it's a pall of doom hanging over your head? Well, your Saturn return is not just about punishment. It can be, but it's also about accomplishments. You see, Saturn is the authority. And when you were born, the authority gave you an assignment. That assignment was to follow your North Node, which is your soul's purpose. If you're not following or developing the frequency of your North Node when Saturn or the authority returns to where it was when you were born, it's checking in to see if you've done the work. And it does this in any sort of major Saturn transit, like Saturn square Saturn, which happens around age 7, Saturn opposite Saturn, which happens around age 14, Saturn square Saturn the second time, which happens around age 21, and then the Saturn return, which happens around ages 28 to 30. So when you just think about these ages, like 7 years old is when you first realize that, oh, I'm my own person. I'm actually separate from my parents. That's when you're really starting to wake up into the world. And it can be kind of a challenging, a difficult awakening as Saturn squares Saturn. And then the opposition happens around age 14, where you're not really a kid. You're not fully a teenager. You're in this in-between, tween. You feel weird about life. It's very confusing. You're in this really awkward stage. That's when Saturn is opposing Saturn. Then Saturn squares Saturn for the second time, which happens around age 21, which is when you are generally coming into adulthood, but at the same time, you're not really an adult. You're in an adult's body, but your mind, your conscious awareness, your perspective of life has not caught up to your body. And you're still childlike, living in an adult body. So that can be a very challenging awakening. Saturn return, happening around age 28 to 30, that's when you start to realize, like, oh my God, I'm actually not going to be young for the rest of my life. My 20s are almost over. What have I been doing in my life? Oh my God, it's a mess. And it's typically a time of crisis. Each of those times can be times of crises, and generally speaking, they typically are, because typically we're not following our soul's purpose. And it's during those periods that we need a reminder to follow our soul's purpose. Now, for those of you who are following your soul's purpose during the Saturn square Saturn, Saturn opposite Saturn, or Saturn conjunct Saturn, aka the Saturn return, during those periods, if you are following your soul's purpose, that is when you're elevated. That's when the authority says, oh, wow, look, you have been doing something which you're supposed to be doing. You are following your soul's purpose. You are ready for that next stage. You are ready to elevate to that next level. And that's what's happening with Shohei Ohtani. Now, in order to know that that's what's happening with Shohei Ohtani, it's not just about looking at his life and how successful he has been as a baseball player. I mean, he's the only player in Major League Baseball history to have been an all-star as both a pitcher and a hitter. He's the only player in Major League Baseball history to have 100 home runs and 500 strikeouts. 100 home runs as a hitter and over 500 strikeouts as a pitcher. He's the only player to hit over 30 home runs and win over 10 games as a pitcher in the same season. He's the only player to have multiple games with 10 or more strikeouts as a pitcher and hit multiple home runs in a game in the same season. He's the only player to have over 45 home runs, over 25 stolen bases, and have pitched over 100 innings in the same season. That's how unique and special he is. And this season, he became the first player to hit over 50 home runs and steal over 50 bases in the first season, in the same season. And he also became the first player to be ranked in the top 5 of every offensive category in the history of baseball. And he did it all during the midst of his Saturn return. So saying all of this, you must be saying, well, you must be thinking, well, okay, Scott, his Saturn return must be a professional baseball player. I mean, obviously, what is his North Node in the sign of baseball? Because he's doing all these great baseball things. So maybe that must be it. But no, of course not. His North Node isn't in baseball, but it's the frequency of his North Node. And I'm going to get into this, but I just want to say that I hope that this is not only astonishing, but I hope it's encouraging to every single individual out there that has ever heard of the Saturn return and said or thought, oh no, my Saturn return. Shohei Ohtani is showing you how you can thrive during a Saturn return. So Shohei Ohtani's North Node is in Scorpio. And Scorpio is the fixed water sign symbolized by the scorpion and ruled by Mars, the god of war, the planet of action, aggression, conflict, courage, authenticity, and Pluto, the god of death, lord of the underworld, the planet of transformation. Being born with the North Node in Scorpio means that the South Node is in Taurus, and Taurus is the fixed earth sign symbolized by the bull. Taurus is ruled by Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, the planet of relationships. So when it comes to having the North Node in Scorpio, you want to develop your psychic abilities, your psychic intuition. Scorpio represents the occult, the taboo. It represents what occurs in the shadows that you can't see but you know is there. What occurs behind closed doors. The Scorpio represents secrets, sex, and the sharing of money, intimacy, vulnerability, karmic bonds. So being born with the North Node in Scorpio means that you're somebody who is being called to put yourself in vulnerable situations, in situations that may be uncomfortable, in situations where you may feel completely insecure, such as a scorpion in the middle of a room in a crowded party. It would feel very insecure there because it's very vulnerable. It might get stepped on. With the South Node in Taurus, it means that if you're born with the North Node in Scorpio, you need to release the material. And your need to be surrounded by the material, to satisfy your material or sensory needs. It's about releasing that need for control and that need for security. And I'm going to show you how Shohei Ohtani has done exactly that. Now, first of all, Shohei, his Saturn return began in March of this year. And it lasted for a few months. And then, not even a few months. I think I'm exaggerating here. Let me go back and just look at my notes. So Shohei, Saturn return, it really started to hit him in February, and then it came on strong in March, and it carried through April, and then it dissipated. But now it's come back. September, October, November, and December is when he's going to be experiencing the second and final wave of his Saturn return. This has been an extremely long second wave of his Saturn return because Saturn is in Pisces right now, and it's ending its retrograde at 12 degrees, and that is exactly where Saturn was when Shohei Ohtani was born. It was at 12 degrees in Pisces. So what that means, well, let's think back. So what was going on in Shohei's life back in March? Well, in March, secrets were being revealed about Shohei Ohtani. One good, one not so good. The good one was he announced his marriage. He had been married. And this is Shohei Ohtani following his North Node to a T. Because when you think of Scorpio being the sign of secrets, Shohei Ohtani got married. And all of his teammates on the Dodgers not only didn't know that he was getting married or had a wedding, they didn't even know he had a girlfriend. So that's how secretive Shohei Ohtani had been about his relationship with his now wife, who he'd been with for 3 or 4 years. Their relationship was cultivated almost entirely in private because Shohei Ohtani is so famous that he can't go anywhere in public without being recognized, noticed, or people coming up to him, especially when he's in his home country of Japan. So that's one. The not so good reveal was his interpreter, who had been with him since he arrived to play with the Angels back in 2017, 2018 is when he signed with the Angels. That his interpreter has pled guilty for one charge of bank fraud, as well as one count of submitting a false tax return for impersonating Ohtani with Ohtani's bank and stealing over $16 million, which he was using to pay off gambling debts. Now, there are those out there that, like to say that, oh, Shohei, he had to have known, he was probably involved. They were both gambling and the interpreter had to take the fall, and now Shohei's going to pay him for spending. I mean, he's going to be sentenced just in a couple days here on October 25th. Wow. The same day that Shohei Ohtani is playing his first game in the World Series, Friday, October 25th, is the same day that his interpreter is going to be sentenced. And in addition to the prison time, which carries a maximum sentence for 33 years, he also must pay Ohtani $17 million and pay $1 million to the IRS. So I could do a whole nother episode on Ohtani's interpreter and the connection between the two of them. But in this one, I'm just going to try to keep it to Ohtani and his Saturn return. And I'm bringing this up because it's very significant that this occurred. It came into the public that Ohtani's interpreter had stolen all this money from Ohtani in March. That was a huge secret that came out. Huge. It could have completely and utterly torpedoed Ohtani's season. Instead, he went on to have the greatest season anyone has ever had in the history of baseball at the DH position, which is designated hitter. I mean, let's remember that Ohtani has been rehabbing his elbow for Tommy John surgery, his second Tommy John surgery, replacing the ligament. So he hasn't pitched since he was with the Angels last year. So while he's rehabbing his arm, he's also going out and playing baseball and doing things that nobody has ever done before. So thinking about Ohtani and the interpreter, let's start there. And how this is a representation of Ohtani following his North Node. Part of following your North Node in Scorpio is to be vulnerable. And when Ohtani came to the United States, here he is from Japan, doesn't know anyone here, isn't from here. He relied heavily on his interpreter to show him the ropes. His interpreter is from Southern California, though he's fluent in Japanese. I think he was born in Japan, but grew up in Southern California. So you couldn't watch, you wouldn't see a picture of Ohtani off the field unless he was with his interpreter. He was everywhere with him. They were joined at the hip. So to hear that his interpreter had been stealing all this money from Ohtani was quite simply shocking. It was absolutely shocking. But Ohtani, in following his North Node, allowed himself to be vulnerable with his interpreter. Ippei Mitsuhara, that's the interpreter, Ippei Mitsuhara. He allowed him to set up his bank account, to work with the bank, to talk to his agents, to his attorneys. He was fully ingrained in Ohtani's life. So that's why it was easy for him to impersonate Ohtani or take the money from Ohtani to pay off his gambling debts. So Ohtani was following his North Node by being vulnerable with someone else, allowing somebody to know his secrets, to know his financial information. But where he slipped up was not being discerning about who this individual was. He was fooled, he was deceived. Or not, if you believe the conspiracy. I'm going to side with the idea that Ohtani didn't know, because it just seems too broad to me. But I think that Ohtani, when you look at the rest of his chart, he's a Cancer sun. He's very nurturing, very kind, very sensitive, and it feels like he was taken advantage of. And I think that's the lesson for Ohtani, is that moving forward, he needs to be more discerning about who he's vulnerable with. That's part of the North Node experience in Scorpio, is that you need to learn to be vulnerable, and then you're stung like the scorpion. You are hurt. You are betrayed, which is a key phrase or a key word of Scorpio, is being betrayed. So it's through that betrayal that Ohtani has transformed and is now more aware, and that won't happen to him again. That is how he's learning to really protect his energy while at the same time being vulnerable. He's a very secretive man. He had this girlfriend. He had a dog. No one knew about the dog until he revealed the dog. So the way that he is secretive indicates he's following his North Node. The second key, I will say, is his relationship to money and the material. Taurus is symbolized by the bull, and the bull is the symbol of Wall Street. It's out in front of Wall Street. The stockbrokers want a bull market. So the bull, Taurus, represents money. It represents my money. When Ohtani signed with the Dodgers, he signed a $700 million 10-year contract. And then he told the Dodgers that over the next 10 years, he only wants 10 million. He wants 20 million. Over those next 10 years of his contract, he only wants 20 million of the 700 million. The other 680 million, he said the Dodgers can pay him in the 10 years following the end of his 10-year contract. The reason is because he wants the Dodgers to use that money to build a team around him. So he has completely released the material in that way and said, I don't care about this money. I care about winning. And so I'm willing to sacrifice $680 million for 10 years in order to win, because I'm going to trust that you're going to take that money and invest it in a way that's going to help me win championships. Something he never did with the Angels. He never even made the playoffs with the Angels. So he is hungry to win and willing to sacrifice money in order to win. Now, some people will say, well, okay, sure, it's easy for you to defer $680 million when you're Shohei Ohtani because you're Shohei Ohtani. And Shohei Ohtani is probably the second most famous person in the world after Taylor Swift. I mean, he makes more money in endorsements than he does with that $700 million. So is he really going to miss it? I guess not. But at the same time, it's $680 million that he's saying, you can pay me later. That's still a major sacrifice. But Ohtani doesn't care about the money. He cares about winning. So everyone out there who is born with the North Node in Scorpio, You may have this proclivity to really yearn for everything that the material world has to offer. But the more that you are yearning and going after that material well-being, the further you will get from your goal. The more that you are releasing the material and your need for security, the more abundance you will receive. Case in point, Shohei Ohtani again. The fact that he moved from Japan to the United States to play baseball. Now, he's not the first Japanese player to go from Japan to the United States, but he did so at a very young age. He was like 21, 22 years old. A lot of these Japanese players, they play in Japan for 5-10 years before they take the leap and come to the United States. But Ohtani came in very young. That was a huge risk. Taking that kind of risk is the frequency of Scorpio, because it's about being vulnerable. And especially for somebody who's a Cancer sun. Cancer represents the home. It rules the moon. The moon represents the mother. And so Cancer, as a Cancer sun, Ohtani is somebody that identifies not only with his home, but with his homeland, his country, with Japan. So to leave his family, his parents, to leave Japan and to come to the United States was a huge risk. He's also taken risks in terms of what he's doing on the field. There hasn't been a pitcher since Babe Ruth that could hit baseballs like Babe Ruth. Pitchers, if you're a pitcher, you're a pitcher, and if you're a hitter, you're a hitter. You're not both. And Ohtani's like, I'm both. He's a Gemini moon, so it makes sense that he would see these two sides of himself. One is a pitcher, the other side is the hitter. But there was a lot of talk when he came to the United States that, well, he's not going to be able to do both. He might try to do both, but eventually he's going to have to choose one because the competition is just too intense, too good for him to do both. Okay, well, he did both. He's doing both. He did both. He proved everyone wrong that said that he couldn't do both. That's a major risk. To be able to do what people are saying you can't do. And that's Scorpio as well. So those three instances, the vulnerability in merging power with the interpreter, even though it didn't work out, even though the interpreter stole $16 million from him, it was a valuable lesson for Ohtani. And he will be rewarded because he took the risk to do so in the first place. That's number one. Number two, he deferred $680 million for 10 years so that the Dodgers could build a better team around him. That's a huge risk. That's being vulnerable. Ohtani's being rewarded for that. And then number three, the fact that he left Japan. That's a huge risk. It's even a risk that he left the Angels to go to the Dodgers. I mean, it doesn't seem like a risk because the Angels have been so bad for so long and the Dodgers have been so good for so long. It seems like a no-brainer, but you develop a certain level of comfortability. The Angels let Ohtani do whatever he wanted. And so to switch clubs like that, not necessarily an easy feat for him. It's still a risk, even though it doesn't seem like a risk. There was no guarantees that the Dodgers were going to be as good as they are and they're going to make the World Series. The Dodgers, they make it to the playoffs, it seems, every year, but they haven't made the World Series since 2017. And even then, that was the COVID year, which a lot of people kind of don't count because it was only, or that was not 2017, it was 2020. And that was the COVID year, 60 games. So a lot of people don't look at that as the same as other seasons. So he took a risk to come to the Dodgers. And then finally, the risk that he's taken to be a pitcher and a hitter. He's been rewarded for taking these risks. And it sounds like I'm predicting that the Dodgers are going to win the World Series because of all the risks Ohtani is taking. But at the same time, I don't know the astrological codes of everyone on the team, on the Dodgers, on the Yankees, and it's much more complex than just Shohei Ohtani. But I think that we're going to see Shohei Ohtani play very well in the World Series, just as he has played well all season long and through the playoffs. He's going to continue to be rewarded for the risks that he has taken in his life, in his career, and he's being rewarded for his Saturn return. So I hope that this is inspiring to you in thinking of your Saturn return, because I talk to so many people. When I talk to them about their Saturn return, they're like, oh God, that? Not that. Think of Shohei Ohtani. It hasn't been easy for him to move from Japan to the United States, to be a pitcher and a hitter, to play for the Angels, a losing franchise for 7 years, to move to the Dodgers, and to have his interpreter steal $16 million from him. None of that is easy. It's not easy to develop a relationship with somebody, his wife, in private for 3-4 years. That's not easy. But Ohtani has taken the risk. And through that risk, he's receiving the reward. So what is your risk? What is your North Node? What do you need to lean into? When you think of the North Node in Scorpio and the South Node in Taurus, the South Node in Taurus, those who are born with the South Node in Taurus desperately want that money. But in order to receive that money, they must release the need for it. When you release the need for it as Shohei has, you get more of it than you could imagine. So if you're curious to learn more about your North Node and how to follow that frequency, or about Saturn return, your Saturn transits, when Saturn is squaring your Saturn, or squaring or opposing or conjunct any planet in your chart, it's bringing you some sort of lesson. It's urging you to lean into that North Node frequency, or it's elevating you to the next level. If you're curious about any of that and how it's affecting you, how the planets and stars have shaped you from body to soul, then I encourage you to contact me for a reading at theweeklytransit.com. Until then and beyond, I wish you all the best as you ride the planetary waves. Thank you for listening to The Weekly Transit. If you're curious to learn how these transits, or any other transits, may be affecting you, or if you're interested in learning more about your astrological code, contact me for a reading at theweeklytransit.com. If you're interested in delving into the world of psychotherapy with Gabriella, you can schedule a consultation with her at GabriellaDurso.com. That's GabriellaDurso.com. Support for the podcast can be done through a monthly contribution on Spotify, rating us 5 stars, subscribing to our channel on YouTube, or writing a favorable review on Apple Podcasts. We are grateful for your support. This episode was produced by me, Scott Tajarian. Music written by Ben Leinbach from Listen Deep by Amber Herzog-Lyman. Wishing you all the best as you ride the planetary waves.